Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So, members, do we have a form of words?
We do, Mr. Chairman, and it is, quote, "The proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity, impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact of the solar special protection area," to which I would like to add, as I said at the beginning, that propose that we give planning permission.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Mason, would you like to add anything? Just so we have two motions.
It's incumbent upon me to, of course, inform members that is the wording previously used. For those that are unclear, that wording that has found to be vague and generalised. Consequently, a decision based on that basis is highly likely to fail and have costs awarded against it on appeal.
Ian, are they likely to appeal if planning permission is granted, as in my proposal? Are they likely to appeal to have it turned down?
You can appeal against the refusal of planning permission, and you can appeal against the imposition of planning conditions. Clearly, you're only talking about the first stage of the two-stage process utilised for these things. If you then wish to go on and impose some conditions they find unacceptable, we have, and that has happened in this committee, we have had appeals against those. So I can't say that there is no likelihood of appeal.
And Ian, could you list me the conditions that you've heard me ask for?
You have not asked for any conditions.
Excellent.
So, we take the Smith-Symes, part two-thirds of the tongue
sorry,
twister.
but the proposal is always that the first one that has been was put gets taken first.
Well, it was, wasn't it?
Just to confirm, Councillor Smith proposed the officer's recommendation, which was seconded. Your proposal was not a proper proposal, so it comes after the Smith proposal. So we'll firstly vote on the Smith proposal. We also need to go on to the next bit. If you're saying it needs planning permission, we then would need to go on for the second part of the decision with yours, and that's not been done yet.
So in this committee, we have taken the view that the first thing we have to decide is whether it needs planning permission or not, and are we sticking to that? And then we come to the suggestion about whether we say yes or no to it.
Yes, you're proposing that it needs planning permission.
And that will be taken first.
And that, no, first, before you consider the second part
yes.
of it. So we'll deal with the Smith proposal first.
So this is in two parts, as I understand it. Part A
yes.
is whether this needs planning permission or not.
Yes.
That is a separate thing,
yes.
and we take a vote on that. Second part is whether we give planning permission, and that's a separate thing,
yes.
and we then take a vote on that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, but firstly we'll deal with the Smith proposal.
Sorry, the first thing we have to deal with is whether it needs planning permission or not, which you've agreed with. Is that correct?
Only in your proposal, not in the Smith proposal.
So this committee has always done it in two parts. The first bit to decide if we need planning permission or not, and the second part then following that. Are you saying that we have done this incorrectly?
The officer's recommendation is that it doesn't need planning permission, so therefore we do not need to. And that's been considered already, so it's just as set out in the committee report.
So you're saying, Julia, every single committee that we've done for the last 6 months, we've done incorrectly, and that we've...
No, Councillor Vernon Jackson, I'm not saying that.
Okay, so
can we just
move
on?
We're going around
yes.
and around and around. Hugh, did you want to add something?
To get rid of this, can we just accept that in this instance we decide that we do need planning permission and then grant it planning permission, and that will get it out of the way, and no one will be the wiser, and
well, Juliet?
No, we've got a motion on the table from Councillor Smith to move the officer's recommendation, and that was seconded by Councillor
So
Symes.
the officer's recommendation is we don't need planning permission? Yes?
Yes.
Right. We must make some progress on this. Okay, we have a proposal and a seconder. Those in favour? Those against? And abstentions?
That motion has failed.
So we move on to Councillor Van Jackson's proposal, seconded by whoever it was. You?
Which is, it does need planning permission, but we agree planning permission.
I don't think we've discussed the second part. Should we take the vote on the planning permission bit first?
So we've just had a vote on whether to give planning permission. Okay.
No, we need to...
No,
do
no,
need to-
we haven't.
Yeah, we did. So those in favour of the Vernon Jackson Mason proposal, whether it requires planning permission.
Yes.
Yeah. Those in favour? Against? Abstentions?
Chairman, yeah, can I therefore assist with talking about the merits of the provision? As this committee has now resolved that plan permission is required, you now need to consider whether conditions should be imposed. Conditions have to be imposed. You don't get a privilege here. You have to impose a time limit condition. You have to impose a approved plans condition. And I would advise you, because you have brought this into the scope of regulatory control, i.e. you have defined this as development, you need to impose conditions, as we discussed with Councillor Mason earlier, and a requirement for a legal obligation to deal with the increase in occupancy's impact on nitrates and recreational disturbance. So that, in this case, would therefore be limiting the occupancy, limiting the time for implementation to a year, and dealing with the wastewater limitation, as well as a general obligation to effectively delegate decision to officers, so it's subject to that legal agreement. They are the minimum conditions you must impose now you have brought it into the scope of needing plan permission to make a lawful, robust decision. I say lawful and robust as I've given you advice previously on your successful appeal. Yeah.
Okay.
So can we do that through granting permission for council officers to give you the authority to produce those conditions, or do we need to do it in words here?
That's the standard. Your motion would be that plan permission be granted subject to conditions, and those conditions would need to be listed. The ones I've listed, to be absolutely clear, are an approved plans condition. I won't list the actual plan numbers. An implementation period of 1 year, a condition limiting the wastewater output of the building per person, and all of that is subject to a legal agreement to deal with adverse impact on the SPA. So the resolution of the committee would be to delegate to officers to grant subject to the legal agreement in accordance with those conditions.
All very sensible.
In which case, can I propose that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions that the development permitted shall be begun by before the expiration of 1 year from the date of the planning permission, that the approved plans will be agreed in writing by the local planning authority and shall be carried out in accordance with the approved drawings, and that there should be a satisfactory completion of a legal agreement to secure mitigation of the impact of the proposed development on the soil and special protection areas by securing the payment of a financial contribution. Is that adequate, Ian?
Juliet?
Thank you. And that is what I propose.
Thank you. So, right, okay, so we have the proposed seconder with the conditions that we've just heard. Anything else? No? Okay, those in favour? And against? And abstentions? Linda, I think you have to do something. You have to. Thank you. Juliet?
Well, we have 3 votes in favour there were no votes against and 3 abstentions, so planning permission is granted as per the wording set out by the members.
Thank you, Juliet. Well, it took a little while, but we got there. Shall we move on to Oxford Road?
Oxford Road. This is an application for the change of use from a 5-bed HMO to an 8-bed HMO. That increase of occupancy is examined specifically in detail in paragraph 5.2 through to 5.13, examining the different changes in relevant impact from increase of 3 occupants, increasing from 5 to 8. I won't repeat all the information in there. It is, I think, self-explanatory. It leads officers to the conclusion that plan permission is required, and that as this is a material change of use between the existing lawful use, which, as the SMAT says, wanted to be confirmed on the decision letter, to the proposed use of an 8-bed HMO. Consequently, plan permission needs to be assessed on its own merits. The report goes on to assess the application on its own merits and concludes that while there is a minor technical failure in space standards, in that 2 of the bedrooms at 9.98 square metres are below 10 square metres, and therefore if we did planning by numbers, we'd be requiring the larger 34 rather than the smaller 22.5 combined living space. We don't do planning by numbers, we make an overall assessment, and it is deemed that the overall assessment, the bedrooms, some of which are very large, nearly 16, and the smallest of which being those 2 9.98 square metres, when considered with 23.96 square metre combined living space, results overall in an acceptable living environment in the area, or in the dwelling, in an area that is currently at 12.38% mix for reference. An officer's recommendation is therefore that plan permission should be granted subject to legal agreement and planning conditions.
Thank you. No deputations. Members' questions on this application? Councillor Symes.
I'm rather concerned by the lack of bathrooms in this property to the number of people. I don't think it's sufficient. Is there anywhere where other bathrooms could be created, or are they just limited to these 3, which I really don't think is enough for 8 people?
So, could we have the presentation back on, please? Yeah. So the number of bathrooms provided is adequate for 8 people in accordance with the private sector housing guidance, hence the recommendation that we're bringing forward. Clearly, say some of these rooms are quite large, 15.96 bedrooms, 7 and 8. You could hive off areas inside them for en-suites. That would be for the property owner to decide to do if they felt that was necessary. If this is an inadequate quality of amenity in your view, say contrary to officer recommendation and your own published guidance, then you can withhold planning permission. But I would very much guide you that while en-suites are far more popular these days, the provision of bathrooms and the downstairs WC as well does meet the minimum requirements for this scale of HMO, and thus that wouldn't be a robust reason to withhold planning permission.
Other questions? Councillor Mason.
Am I correct in thinking that the only way in which you could get bicycle storage in this place is by taking your bicycle through the hall, through the kitchen and through the lounge in order to reach bicycle storage?
That's right.
Other questions? Comments? Councillor Beveridge.
Can I propose that the proposal is considered to be development, etc.? I know the office... Oh, we don't need that one, this one. Okay, sorry.
The comment is that I think the issue here for me is whether the adequate size of the lounge is at 23.96 sufficiently large to mitigate for the fact that the bedrooms, 2 of these bedrooms, fall below our standard. Okay, it is only marginally below our standard, but if we have a cut-off line, we have a cut-off line, and they are below the cut-off line. Now, we might argue that this is mitigated by the excellence of the other facilities, which would be the excellent toilets, en suites in all rooms, an exceedingly large lounge, good garden perhaps, good access for your bicycle storage. But in fact, none of those are here. This is really pushing it right beyond, in my view, probably beyond the limits. I don't think this provides a satisfactory standard of accommodation, and I intend to vote against it.
Was that
and
a
I will
proposed-
therefore
was-
propose that it be refused.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Okay, any other comments?
So, Chairman, in the last application, I was happy to propose that planning permission was given because it had been done to a good standard and went round and looked at it, and it was good. This one I'm much less certain about. I know the advice is that we shouldn't do planning by numbers, but I think Councillor Mason has a very good point that there might have been reasons to make an exception, to say, okay, the 2 bedrooms are only slightly too small, therefore the lower level of communal space is okay. But this looks as if this is being done to not the same high standard that the previous application was done on. And we're asked to look at these applications on an individual basis, and therefore I think Councillor Mason is right, and on this occasion that we should say no. Ian, your computer's about to restart.
Any further thoughts, ideas on this application before we make progress? Okay, so we have a proposal and a seconder, Hugh and Russell. If there's nothing else,
Apologies, members, just be absolutely clear on the reasons for refusal. I'm pretty sure we are, but we didn't have a verbatim. Councillor Mason, I assume the reasoning was that the provision of communal living space, because all the rooms are over standard, they're just not sufficiently over standard to justify the lower communal space. So the provision of communal living space is insufficient to make a quality living environment. Yeah. Well, to be clear, you're not mitigating anything. All the rooms are 6.5 is your standard. So the logic of the lower communal living space justification is if you have sufficiently big rooms, they can recreate in their rooms as well as the living space. 2 of these rooms are 2 centimetres too small, and thus your concern is there is insufficient space to recreate. So it is the insufficient communal living space does not result in the quality of living environment deemed appropriate, contrary to PCS 23 of the local plan.
okay, that's the proposal on the table. Seconded. Those in favour? And those against? Abstentions?
That motion was carried.
Thank you, Juliet. Let's move on to 59 Manners Road.
So this is your only certificate of lawfulness on your agenda. So you're not looking at the merit of the proposal now. You're looking at whether that fundamental question, does this need planning permission? So it's fairly black and white on that basis, but as always, it is the shades of grey where judgment lies. 59 Manners Road there, so really this is just for context. The change, a number of permitted development physical alterations have occurred to the building. All those operational developments are lawful. As you can see there, the largest of them have been approved under a prior approval notification back in 2021. So all those operational works are approved. However, prior to those works, the last lawful use of this HMO was as a 5-bed HMO. It is now changing to an 8-bed HMO for very similar reasons. It's a slightly different property. 101 Oxford Road it was a flat frontage property with a narrow door, so its bin refuse would be displayed slightly differently compared to the opportunity given by the forecourt of 59 Manners Road. But again, this is examined in detail within the report. It is felt that the change in occupancy from 5 beds to 8 beds in this case, because of that impact on refuse collection and likelihood of additional parking stress and demand, is a material change of use. And as that is the question that the LDC seeks to get an answer to, it is therefore not lawful to change between that 5-bed HMO to an 8-bed HMO without plan permission, and the recommendation is to refuse the certificate for the reasons laid out in the report. Again, for clarity, like all of these, as I say, the SMAT does correct the description so that we do all understand exactly what it is you're being asked to judge in this case, whether or not a change from this 5-bed to a proposed 8-bed would be lawful, and the officer recommendation is that it would not. It would require plan permission, and that is as far as you go today. Whether or not it would get plan permission, whether it meets standards, that would be for a future application should the applicant wish to pursue it.
Thank you, Ian. We have some deputations. Mr. Tutton, you have 6 minutes to give your deputation.
Chairman, thank you for allowing me to present this deputation in favour of my client's application for a certificate of lawful development which confirms that this property may be used as an 8-person HMO instead of 5 without the need for planning permission, as, in my opinion, such a change would not constitute a material change of use requiring planning consent. My client naturally welcomes the officer's recognition at paragraph 5.6 of their report that there is no evidence that a more intensely used HMO is likely to generate more complaints regarding noise and antisocial behaviour than a smaller HMO. Issue is taken, however, with the contention in paragraph 5.8 of the report that, and I quote, parking demand or stress is however considered to be more likely in the scenario of an increased occupancy from 5 to 8. Figure 5 of the Parking Standards SPD sets down your council's car parking requirement for Class C4 and sui generis HMOs. The requirement is 2 spaces for each dwelling with 4+ bedrooms. That is, that the parking requirement of 2 spaces is the same for an HMO with 5 rooms as an HMO with 8 rooms. The officers are right to recognise that the application site is sustainably located within easy walking distance of facilities at the Pompey Centre, bus routes on Goldsmith Avenue and Fratton Station. But issue is taken with their judgment that a 60% increase in occupation is, notwithstanding this, considered to lead to a likely associated increase in car ownership and identifiable impact on car parking amenity and availability. 2 parking permits have been issued to 5 residents of 59 Manners Road, but only 1 car is currently owned. The availability of services and public transport makes this sustainable location very attractive to non-car owners. No issue is taken with the officer's contention that an increase in the number of residents would likely increase the prospective need to remove more refuse and recycling material from my client's premises, but I do not share the view that, again the quote, significant increase in refuse bins would be readily evident. Wheelie bin storage in forecourts is an established characteristic of Manners Road, and 1 more bin in the forecourt of number 59 would not be readily apparent. For these reasons, Chairman, I hold to the view that an increase in the number of bedrooms from 5 to 8 would not constitute a material change in the use of 59 Manners Road requiring planning permission, and that the officer's recommendation should be put aside. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tutton. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. You won't be surprised to know, as the local councillor, that I won't be agreeing with those comments. I'm going to speak twice in this meeting, and this one is to support the officer recommendation to refuse the certificate of lawfulness. I just want to start by saying something that I've said many, many times in this meeting, and that is that I do think there is a need for high quality shared housing in this city. I completely respect the comments that were made earlier by the agent here today around that aspiration to achieve that. And like many people in this room, I've also lived in shared housing, particularly not just as a student, but also as someone early in my career. And I wish that much of it had been the high quality of HMOs that we see approved at this committee. I also want to say that I have been where you are on the planning committee. I don't envy you, and I fully understand all the planning constraints that you're working within, and I've listened carefully to the report. And I'm well versed in saying that, in my opinion, that so many properties, particularly in roads like Manners Road, have become larger and larger, what I call by just one more, by a kind of stealth situation. And I'm really pleased to see that this leap from 5 to 8 is recognised as making a material planning change. I would disagree that it won't have an impact on amenity, but I do agree with the other comments, particularly the one about waste. So I'm pleased to support the officer report that this 60% increase in occupancy would overall indeed have a material change of use which would need planning permission. We talk about mixed and balanced communities, and this frequently comes down to the question of whether the term balance is in relation to the number of properties in an area rather than the number of people in it. So I'm really pleased to see that in this instance, the number of people is considered to make that material difference. And I hope this is noted by the committee if this application returns for planning permission for a use that may already be established. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hawson. I'm pleased you didn't use your privilege of unlimited time. Some councillors seem to go on. Of course. Thank you very much. Ian?
Just a few comments to assist members. I think Mr Tutton made some very good points. They are the key matters that you are assessing. Councillor Horton, the same. There's a difference between a smaller number and a bigger number. It's how that is evident, how that is perceived. In a certificate of lawfulness, it is the obligation of the applicant to provide evidence to prove their point. Slightly different in the planning application, and certainly very different in an enforcement scenario. So your judgment is whether the applicant's submission, which is just a bold statement, unpacked a bit for you by his agent in today's meeting, is convincing that there is not a material change of use in light of the comments that we provided for you within the assessment report by officers. I would just warn you slightly, the mixed and balanced question obviously has no relevance to this. This is not a policy judgment in any sense. So this is purely a legal judgment, applying where appropriate the planning judgments within the framework of the law, rather than assessing it against whether we feel that there should be more or less HMOs in this area, etc. So just to warn you off that. If you do find yourselves turning your minds to that, you need to turn your minds to whether that change from 5 to 8 is materially evident, and that's so to such an extent that the nature of that accommodation would be materially different and plan permission required.
So, do we believe this planning application requires planning permission as per the officer's?
Yes, Chairman. I think Mr Maguire makes a good case that there is a requirement here for planning permission. I don't want to state whether I'd support it or not support it if it came back for planning permission, because I think that would be prejudgment. But in terms of making a decision that this needs to come for planning permission, then I think the case is made, and be happy to recommend to propose the officer recommendation.
John? I'd second that, Chair. So we've got a proposal and a seconder. Unless there are any comments or further views? Hugh?
Yes, I heard the deputation made. I think, however, that a 60% increase in the number of people and a 60% increase in the occupancy is sufficiently large that we must consider this to be something which the planning committee should consider. It's been obviously, as we heard earlier this morning, it's a bone of contention whether a smaller 20% increase would be something which we consider, but certainly a 60% increase is something which changes the whole dynamic, and so we have to consider it.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So,
Apologies, before you do go to the vote, I mean, just to be absolutely clear in light of that comment, because we had a deputation and a comment from a member now. Obviously, I would anticipate an appeal on this one. It's certainly what I would do if it was my property, because they're currently licensed for 8 people, so they're going to want to do that. They've put the investment into it. The appeal would be fought on the officer's report. So Councillor Horton, as a deputation, suggested she disagreed with officers around the impact on amenity, and Councillor Mason has made an implication that on a purely numerical basis that would be sufficient. I would certainly warn you against the purely numerical basis, because obviously clearly it does depend on your baseline before you look at a percentage increase. So it is not the fact that it's a 60% increase in occupancy, it is the implications of that increase of 3 people to 5, which arithmetically is 60%, but that's not the key issue. So there could be a scenario where a 60% increase in a different baseline would not be material. That's clearly something that would have to be examined on its own merits in due course. And indeed, obviously, small HMO to large HMO within the same use class may be granted anyway. So I would just warn you that members, where you're currently standing and voting, would be that the 2 issues of contention that any future appeal will be fought on is the implication around parking and bins being the indicators of the materiality to the change of use.
the results of the implications around the increase. So I think that was the meaning, wasn't it? Okay. Unless there's anything else, shall we move to the vote? Those in favour of Van Jackson Smith proposed? Yeah, to move the officer's recommendation to refuse. Those in favour?
That's unanimous. The certificate of lawfulness is refused.
Thank you, Juliet. 24 Norman Road.
Norman Road, again, George edge of the SMAT. To be clear, the change of use is from a 6-bed HMO to a 7-bed HMO. So that needs to be updated compared to the description that appears in the agenda. The circumstances are we're in an area that is relatively abundant with HMOs, 46% HMOs at the moment, this being one of them. The space standards are met across the board for this application, with each of the rooms between 10 and 10.5 square metres and a 22.5 square metre combined living space, 2 bathrooms serving the proposed 7 bedrooms, and that 7th bedroom created through the change of use of a lounge downstairs. This is, like the Lane judgments, a 6 to 7 bed change of use that is not considered by officers to require planning permission. Members will therefore need to apply their non-generalised, non-vague judgment to why in this case it would require planning permission should they wish to assess it against policies that officers would then advise you are met by the design and proposal within this application. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and we'll have some deputations. Maisie, over to you. 6 minutes.
This application is for a change of use from a Class C4 house in multiple occupation to a 7-person house in multiple occupation. The property provides 7 bedrooms which meet or exceed the 10 square metre bedroom size which dictate a required communal area of 22.5. This property also meets that requirement. This application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan, and also complies with the Houses in Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. I feel it is also important to note that an almost identical layout was refused by this committee for an application next door at number 26 Norman Road on the 10th of August 22. This is subsequently allowed at appeal. To refuse such a fully compliant application will only result in an increased workload, time and cost for all those involved in subsequently taking this application to appeal also. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you all to fully support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Susie.
Thank you. I appreciate that each application needs to be considered on its own merit, but there may be a little bit of repetition, but I will try and keep my comments brief because I know how much you've got to get through on this agenda. Just to reiterate 2 points. One was the point I made just now about the high quality housing needed, and the second thing around having listened to the report and the debate before about the planning committee's constraints. But I'm actually here to stand up for my residents, and that does include families, couples, single people who are living in owner-occupied or rented non-HMO properties in the area. Many people have lived in this area, and I know there have been a couple of objections to this for up to 40 years, and they feel that there is over-intensification of development, cram them in, development of 2 up, 2 down houses. But I'm also here for the people who live in those houses as well. Quite simply, and to repeat, I don't agree with the wider planning view that only one more makes no material difference to the amenity to the area. We know that these properties can't become just one more by stealth. I understand that recommendations in the report are reasoned on the HMO policy dealing with number of houses, not the number of occupants, but family homes, which were 2 up, 2 down, were bought by developers, changed into HMOs for up to 6, and now arguably they're increasing incrementally. If we took all of the houses in the area that that happened to, you would end up adding the equivalent of 6 or 7 houses to a very, very densely flat-fronted area of the city. Anyway, specifically to this application, I do note that the assessment by the officers is that that there is a result in a significant, there does not result in a significant difference in character, but it does acknowledge that there's a change in character. Obviously, that's not in officers' recommendations considered to be materially different. I disagree, but I'm not making the decision. You are. And I appreciate that it does add to the housing stock. So we talk about mixed and balanced communities, and I feel that this is an increase in an overly intensified area anyway. And the final point I just want to make is I've noticed these descriptions and I see that there's an update. So we're obviously not using the word sui generis, so we're going for numbers. But so this is now a seven person HMO from a 6, probably was a 5 or a 4 at some point. And I just fear that this will make it easier for people to add just one more to make, which is considered to be not materially different. Whereas a brief reflection in time will show that actually the last decision that we made, which is 5 to 8, is significant. And actually, if it's done in stages, then it's not, I think, is a real challenge for us in the city.
Thank you. Yes, we are in the business of material planning considerations, that committee, of course. Okay, questions?
Ian, could I ask on the plan, on the proposed second storey, there's a dotted line. There are 2 dotted lines. Are they the ridge heights, where the ridges are? Or am I sorry? I may be on the.
Do you mean this dotted line?
No, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. That's right. No, that's the ridge height. Yeah, thank you.
Well, so that's the slope of the roof.
Sorry, my other question was in terms of this one doesn't have en suites, but it's got 2 shower rooms and 1 separate loo. Does that meet the requirement for space?
Yes, yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we get to the nub of this, whether we think it requires planning permission? Gerald?
Can I propose that the proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity of use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area?
Obviously, members, it is incumbent upon me to advise you, as demonstrated by the fact you used identical wording, it is generalised, and I can advise you in line with the inspector's decision, vague. A decision on that basis is unlikely to be successful on appeal, should an appeal be made, and costs would likely to be awarded against the council.
Councillor Vijay, is there more specific?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
You're
I'll be proposing giving planning permission, but on this bit.
okay. All right. Okay. Well, anybody want to second that? You haven't got a seconder at the moment. Okay. Well, let's make some progress. Any other thoughts on this planning permission?
I wanted to give a comment really about we are having more and more that have en suites, and I think concern really here is, while been told it's up to the standard, I'm thinking, you know, we've got one shower which essentially is for 5, and it's right next to the kitchen dining, so that means everyone's coming out of shower is going to be coming out in a dressing gown to be viewed, let's just say. I just kind of don't feel that it's appropriate. I mean, even actually just the design itself, the floor plan, you know, put the bins underneath someone's window and the shower. I just don't know why anyone would plan to put it there. I mean, obviously they can be moved, but it just seems very silly. I just think in general that it's not enough. It's not enough. One shower and one toilet, essentially. Okay, there's 2 toilets upstairs, but it's just not enough really for 7.
Is that it's just a comment at this moment in time. Any other comments?
I'm not sure really needs. You have adopted standards. You vigorously applied them previously to 2 square centimetre under provision. I would be recommending that it would only be consistent to apply where they have fully met the standards. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? We appear to be at an impasse. There we go.
Well, because there's no seconder for the proposal that we're going to need planning permission, I would have proposed the officer proposed giving planning permission, but without that initial bit, I can't, and therefore I won't be.
Are you withdrawing your...
No, I still think it needs to, we need to stick with having the planning permission as we've done throughout these committees over the last few months.
I'm looking across the room. I will second. I'll second your proposal. So a proposer and a seconder for Gerald's motion.
This is just the first bit, which is that we need to do planning permission.
Anybody else? Any other views on this application that we need planning permission? All right. Those in favour? Against? And abstentions?
Committee have decided that it needs planning permission, so we therefore need to go on and consider the rest of the motion.
Thank you, Juliet.
I'm therefore happy to propose we give planning permission. We can't have a standard and use it in one application to say no and then ignore it here. So I'm sorry for that. That's how we do it. But you have to, if you've got standards, you've got to stick to them. And therefore, in this case, they have stuck to them, and therefore it is right and proper that we say yes. And therefore, I think we don't get any choice, and therefore I propose that we give conditional planning permission, and we delegate to officers to come up with the usual conditions, which are, as I understand it, starting in a year, agreeing about wastewater, SP, the Solent Special Protection Area, and is there anything else?
It's all detailed in paragraph 6.2.
Yep,
Approved
lovely.
plans will be the other
Thank
minimum
you.
condition.
And subject to the 106 or section 111 agreement.
Of course.
For the
All the
escrow.
usual things. So we've got a proposer, seconder, Councillor Mason. Any other views? Okay, those in favour of Van Jackson Mason proposal? Against? Abstentions?
Planning permission is granted.
Thank you, Julia. Chichester Road.
Thank you. This is an application for, and I'm going to draw your attention to the SMAT, for a change from a 5-bed to a 7-bed, so 2 additional occupants. Apologies, as a typo in paragraph 512. It is 2 additional occupants. This is an area, not many HMOs at the moment, under 5%, and is a larger property, as you can see from the space standards, all rooms generously over the minimum standards. However, while there are 2 additional occupants, that is still by officers, and indeed in line with the Campbell Properties decisions, not considered on its own merits, having looked at this one carefully, to be a material change of use requiring planning permission. We haven't unpacked it in as much detail for members, but obviously the variation between 3 and the step change you get in refuse requirements and the likely impact on parking, in our judgment, is quite different between the variation you get from 2. So this one still falls below the line, still does not need plan permission in the professional recommendation of your officers, and consequently the unconditional approval is recommended. I can take you through the plans should you wish, but it's all fairly self-explanatory, I think it's fair to say. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Mr. Hill, welcome.
Good morning. Afternoon now. Just wanted to start with the first line which the Assistant Head of Planning gave, which was, this area of Portsmouth has a low percentage of HMOs, and this is a larger property. I think that's super important to consider in considering this application. Obviously, this property's previously been occupied as an HMO, and it previously held an HMO licence which expired last year. It was deliberately allowed to lapse given the intention of redeveloping and improving the property, and it's previously been occupied as a fully compliant HMO. I would note that as a business, we've never had an application for a licence refused, and all the properties are fully compliant with the licensing conditions as set out by the relevant documentation. We do have building regulations approval for the works on this property. I've obviously done deputation at 14 of the last 15 planning committee meetings, so I try not to duplicate too much of it. Ultimately, as a business, we convert 3-bedroom mid-terrace houses into 7-bed or 6-bed HMOs. This one lends itself to being a 7-bedroom. After my previous deputations, I've always extended an offer to all councillors present to attend any of our properties to see for themselves what we're doing. I'd further like to extend this invitation to all councillors present. I think it's important to see the standard of accommodation, not just for me and for our clients, but also for the wider HMO community. We've got an HMO that we completed this Friday, which will be an opportune moment to inspect shortly after. The Housing Act and the HMO SPD identifies that as a material consideration, the living environment should be of a good standard. I'd invite you to come and have a look at that. Within a 50-metre radius of this property, there's only 3 HMOs out of 71 properties, which is a percentage of 4.22%, which in essence is 42.2% of the maximum recommended housing mix, so it's less than 50%. Just on that, I think we all accept that a lot of the people that live in HMOs are young people. Portsmouth as a city has nearly double the national average of 20 to 24-year-old residents, even though we are still affected by the 10% calculation. We have nearly double the number of people in the age demographic for which HMOs are one of the only viable ways of them living independently. Just looked on the social housing register. The second line down says that the second to last person to be housed in March was on the waiting list for 668 days, so nearly 2 years. Only 56 people were housed this month. Whilst a number of the people that object to HMOs often cite the loss of family homes as a consideration for why an HMO could be refused, I would propose the argument that it's the opposite. If you have a high proportion of young people that want to live independently, who let's assume they are going to live independently, would otherwise be living in a 1-bed property, ultimately every HMO that we have as a 6 or 7 frees up either 5, 6 other one-bedroom apartments into the general housing market for the private rental sector, which itself is being compressed at the moment due to a significant number of landlords exiting the market due to rising costs, in particular interest rates. So I would argue that rather than HMOs taking away family housing, as it trickles down the effects of us putting these people into high-quality HMOs, actually it increases the number of properties that are available across the rest of the private rental sector, which is really needed at the moment. Just because landlords are selling, it doesn't mean that people are in a position to buy the properties that they previously were living in and rented. So it puts a lot more pressure on people like the Social Housing Register to house those people. And I genuinely believe that without HMOs, you would struggle significantly further. So I would ask all of you to look favourably on this application, but also on the application of other people that are offering high quality HMO accommodation who really care about the tenants that live in the properties, and perhaps have a look at the 4,322 HMOs that there currently are and work out which ones are below the minimum standards, which ones do need work, because we and others are trying to take those properties and improve them, but also identify opportunities for very good HMOs that will be compliant and aesthetically pleasing. A couple of other points is, in terms of the principle of development, it already has the ability to be a 6-bedroom HMO. All of the room sizes exceed the minimum standard needed. In fact, because it's got a 39 square metre communal space, many of the rooms are almost double the size that's required. We have a waste carriers licence, so if there ever is any resultant waste above and beyond that which is collected by the council, we're able to do it typically within 24 hours. Similarly, the main soil stack within the property and indeed the underground drainage for this property will be upgraded in order to make it easier to get rid of the waste from the property. This isn't a requirement of building regulations or planning permission, but it is often a point that's objected. We would be happy to make a contribution towards the impact upon soil and special protection areas. The lady here, I apologise, I've forgotten her name, did mention that she was here to represent the community. Often that's a consideration or a criticism of HMOs. I would argue that the only reason that tenants of HMOs are not a member of the community is if the other residents don't allow them to be so. We've never had any noise complaints. We haven't had any examples of antisocial behaviour, and because it's already an HMO, it doesn't mean that there's any loss of any other properties whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your contributions to our work this municipal year. Members, do we think this application requires planning?
Can we do questions first?
Well,
all right, fine. No, we'll go with you.
If it will help inform our thinking.
Well, it's just a small question. And on page 62, there are dotted lines on the plans. I had originally thought they were ridge heights, but they can't be, I don't think, because they're on the ground floor as well. Do you know what they are?
So, top of page 62 for members. Yeah, they're structural beams. I would suggest. You can see that it's an unusual house having to rebuild a chunk of the rear of the property because you can see greyed out underneath the T-shaped dotted lines on the ground floor. Actually, the wall currently cuts in substantially, and they're rebuilding that whole part of the building. Okay. So they are purely structural alterations rather than indicating a ridge line.
Thank you.
Questions? Do we think this requires, John?
I think it requires planning permission. Let me go and find that. The wording, otherwise you'll get cross. Where is it? I'm sorry, I can't. The proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity of use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact on the soil and special protection area. as said in previous application.
Okay, anybody wish to second Giles' proposal? Seconded by Councillor Mason. Those in favour?
Members, obviously, it is a requirement, to be fair to all applicants, to give you the same advice about the unreasonableness of the position you're taking.
Thank you. Those in favour? Those against? And abstentions?
Members have determined that planning permission is required.
So, let's debate.
Propose the officer's recommendation. This is quite a large building. It is adequate, and indeed above adequate, a space of accommodation. I see no reason to object to this in any way.
Chairman, if I may, the officer's recommendation is an unconditional permission based on the fact it doesn't require planning permission. If you believe it requires planning permission, as you've just voted, you do need to impose conditions.
Right.
Okay, so we're not moving the officer's recommendation.
These would be the standard conditions detailed in paragraph 6.2, I would anticipate.
I'll work them out for you if you want, Ian, but I think we both understand what the standard conditions are. So can I just, am I permitted to propose with the standard conditions?
Julia?
There's the standard conditions and the section 111 or section 106 agreement for the SPA contributions. 1 year limited planning permission, plans, and usually bike storage. Anything I'm missing?
So just to be clear, the standard conditions detailed in paragraph are a 1 year limited time restriction, approved plans condition listing the plans that to be approved, appropriate conditions to limit water usage, and that's linked through to the legal agreements regarding recreational disturbance and nitrates. There are other conditions you can impose, bike storage being one of them, but obviously that's a bespoke condition rather than a standard condition if members feel that that isn't necessary in this case.
Hugh, is that the motion that you're proposing?
Motion with standard conditions,
Okay.
as outlined.
Anybody want to seconded by Councillor Vernon Jackson. Any other proposals, thoughts, ideas? Those in favour of the motion on the table? Against? I think that's...
Planning permission's granted.
Thank you, Juliet. The other Hudson Road, property 57.
Thank you. This is again a 6 to 7 bed change of use. Why aren't you working? Okay. We've got around half the properties in the area, 52.7 are HMOs. The development changes an upper floor study into a 7th bedroom. All the rooms meet your space standards as dictated by your SPD, and again the increase of occupancy by one is not considered by officers to result in a material change of use requiring plan permission, and unconditional plan permission is therefore recommended.
Thank you. Oh, deputation, there we go. I could lost you there.
Thank you. This application is for a change of use from a Class C4 house in multiple occupation to 7-person house in multiple occupation. This application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan, and also complies with the Houses in Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. The property provides 7 bedrooms which meet or exceed the 10 metre squared. As all bedrooms are over 10 metres squared, the property provides 24.11 square metre communal area at the ground floor level. This exceeds the 22.5 square metre requirement. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you all to fully support this recommendation and save time and cost involved in taking this to appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Members? Questions? No questions? Comments?
So can I propose that this requires planning permission, proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area.
Thank you. Anybody wish to second the proposal? Okay, I'll second. Anybody else? Ian?
It is, to be fair to all applicants, to give you that same warning regarding the risk of costs. I will potentially have to say it a couple more times, but it is only fair as each application must be assessed on its own merits.
Thank you. Okay. Those in favour of the proposal that this requires plan permission? Those against? Any abstentions?
Committee have determined that it needs planning permission, so you need to go on to consider the planning application.
Thank you, Juliet. Comments? Gerald?
Can I propose that grant planning permission with the standard conditions?
Linda, you're seconding?
And the Section 106 agreement or Section 111 agreement for the SPA.
Yes.
Okay, unless there are any other views, we have a proposal, seconder. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions?
Planning permission is granted.
Thank you, Gina. Beresford Road.
'98 Beresford Road. This is, again, reference to the SMAT 6 to 7 bed change of use. As you can see, not many HMOs in this area. 4.8%, obviously including the existing HMO. The rooms are, again, relatively generous in size, ranging from 9.26 up to 10.74 with a 34 square metre communal living space. A additional lounge is what's being converted into a bedroom in this case. The only other thing to just briefly mention, which is not on the SMAP, but I've just been checking with officers, we have had a form submitted advising of the applicant's intent to appeal for non-determination. We have not yet had a start date for that appeal, however, so the ability to determine the application still rests with this committee. It is changed from a 6 to a 7 occupancy, which on its own merits is not considered to warrant the need for plan permission, and unconditional permission is therefore recommended.
Over to you.
So this application is for a change of use from a Class C4 house in multiple occupation to a 7-person house in multiple occupation. This application has been appealed for non-determination, however is yet to receive a start letter. Therefore, it's my understanding that the decision that you make today will be the lawful decision, not as states in the report, to purely advise the inspectorate of the decision you would have made. This application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23, the local plan, and complies with the Housing Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. The property provides 7 bedrooms, which range from 9.26 square metres to 15.18 square metres, and all benefit from ensuite shower rooms, which is also above the requirement. As some of the bedrooms are slightly smaller than 10 square metres, the property provides 34.34 square metre communal area at the ground floor level. This slightly exceeds the 34 square metre requirement when not all bedrooms are in excess of 10 square metres. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you to fully support this recommendation and save the time and cost involved in subsequently taking this to appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions? Comments? Russell.
Very similar to Chichester Road in a lot of ways, that this is in a very, very, very compact parking area. It just makes me wonder, so many residents are reaching out. When are we going to start listening to residents, the people that pay into this council and the people that elect councillors as well? I think for me, one of the reasons I'm highlighting this, and it seems to be that parking never seems to be the issue, but on actually on the site, under the consultee comments. There is a bit before saying that they don't think the parking is a material change, but he put here, however, it is noted that the expected level of parking demand for a Class 3C dwelling with 4 or more bedrooms would be 2 off-road spaces. No parking survey information has been submitted to demonstrate on-street capacity if additional demand resulting from the development can be accommodated with a 200-metre walking distance of the application site. Therefore, there is the potential for increased instances of residents driving around the area hunting for a parking space, although is an issue of residential amenity. This could justify a reason for refusal, and consequently you should give this due weight in your determination on the planning application. I mean, we have so many like this. We've had actually so many throughout this whole year, not just here in North End area, but also in other areas like Shadwell, like Ophir, like Oriel Road. And these are family homes. I know earlier on there was a saying that, the fight for it, well, the fight's real because we are losing them. So for me, I do feel that the parking is a real issue. I do think we need to go back to the plan that we have and really take consideration of it.
Thank you. Ian, would you like to comment on the...
I can do, yes. So there is one more occupant. There is no evidence on exactly what the additional parking demand from that would be. So that's a matter of judgment. The judgment officers are providing for you as one more occupant in what is a low-income category is unlikely to cause unreasonable parking stress. So it's certainly not a positive element to the scheme. No one will pretend otherwise. But as always, any adverse implications of the scheme have to be weighed against the positives of the scheme, in this case providing one more person a home, and obviously in light of that overall tilt to the balance that exists from the fact that you have a presumption in favour of development arising from your current failure to deliver a 5-year land supply. So it is an adverse impact. It's a pretty minor one in officers' view on the basis of a likelihood of parking stress from one more occupant, and all of those things when weighed against the presumption and the benefit are not a reason to withhold plan permission.
Okay. Further questions? Thanks, Gerard.
Well, just to do my usual, can I suggest this needs planning permission? The proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity use of the accommodation, the impact on parking waste, amenity impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent SPA.
Thank you. Russell, did you want to put anything on? No. Anybody want to second? Okay.
Question. Since we gather that this is now being taken to the planning inspectorate, are we making a planning decision, and so do we need to have this recommendation? What we're doing is just saying that these are our considerations to go forward to the planning inspectorate, rather than we are not making this planning decision, are we?
Yes, you are, is the short answer. So while we are aware they are seeking an appeal, it hasn't started yet. So until the start letter turns up, it's still within our gift to determine. I would suggest, however, it's a relatively academic point, because we still have to fight that appeal if that letter turns up while I'm sitting here talking to you, and that power is taken away from you before we issue a decision notice. We still have to deal with that appeal, so the committee still needs to come to a resolution, especially if that resolution is contrary to that which officers would otherwise progress in line with the officer recommendation.
Whilst that is so, I think there is a general principle here that if the application had been made, would this alter our requirement to find particular reasons to go ahead, or will we just be commenting on an existing planning application?
Through you, Chair, it would be exactly the same. The only difference would be you would be saying our decision would have been whether or not it needs plan permission, whether or not it should be given plan permission, rather than is. So the judgment and the wording is exactly the same, and indeed a degree of pragmatism in the real world kicks in here, as I say, today, right now, when we checked this morning, we don't have a start letter. That start letter could have turned up while I'm talking to you, in which case you can't issue a decision, but the resolution you're making today would be then informing the response we give to an appeal if it does start before we can get that start letter out the door, before we can get the decision letter out the door.
So let's try and reach a resolution. So we've got Councillor Vernon Jackson's proposal. I'll second. Any other?
With the usual advice regarding costs, sir.
Okay. Unless there's anything else, anybody in favour of Councillor Vernon Jackson's proposal? That this requires planning permission. Those against? Abstentions?
The committee has determined that it needs planning permission.
Can I also propose that we grant planning permission with the usual set of conditions, including start date, wastewater, SBA, Special Protection Area, Section 106 and SIL. And if anything else...
And approved plans.
Yeah. Sorry?
And approved plans.
And approved plans.
Okay. Seconded?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. In favour, unless there's anything else? Those in favour? Against?
Planning permission is granted.
Okay. We're drawing to a close. Kingsland Road.
Thank you. Kingsland Close, so a different part of the city, very different form of house than we usually see for HMOs. I would immediately start and draw your attention to the SMAT, and this is entirely on me, so with my apologies. This is a 5 to 8 bed change of use. So contrary to the written up recommendation, we're not recommending this for unconditional approval. We're recommending this for conditional approval. It does need planning permission. My oversight, again, apologies for that. The last lawful use of this building was as a 5 bed HMO, and consequently the change to 8 does, on its own merits, require plan permission. It has a small forecourt where bin storage could occur, and it has probably slightly less parking stress than you might see elsewhere, but there is still, nevertheless, we feel, sufficient increase in occupancy with those 3 more people to the existing lawful or last lawful 5 occupants to result, for those 2 reasons, in a need for plan permission. However, it fully meets all your space standards as a 8 bed HMO, as a 7 bed HMO, sorry, and on that basis, sorry, an 8 bed HMO, and on that basis, plan permission is recommended with conditions.
Thank you.
This application is for a change of use from a Class C4 house in multiple occupation to an 8-person house in multiple occupation. I note that further details given today state that the last lawful use was for 5 persons. However, 6 tenants have currently moved into the property and it can lawfully be lived in by 6 persons. Therefore, I believe the increase to be for 2 persons only. The application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan, and also complies with the Houses in Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. The property provides 8 bedrooms, which range in from 10.02 square metres to 13.72 square metres, and all benefit from an ensuite, which is also above the requirement. As all bedrooms are over 10 square metres, the property provides 22.96 communal area at ground floor level. This slightly exceeds the 22.5 square metre requirement. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you all to fully support this recommendation and save time and cost involved in subsequently taking this to appeal. Thank you.
Questions? Thoughts?
Just to comment, that's obviously got a new information from the applicant that they have, without licence, moved 6 occupants into this property from our records. clearly, if there were 6 occupants in the property, which could occur, that step 5 to 6 would be both within the same use class and therefore not require plan permission because it would be defined not as development. Then the incremental step from there, 6 to 8, would be a different judgment. There would be back to where we were, a judgment, because we've looked at that concept as one that doesn't need plan permission. However, beyond the statement we've had from the applicant's agent today, and noting that that's been done without licence, the most likely scenario I'd invite members to consider is in fact the last lawful use is 5, and thus the 5 to 8 does need planning permission, and there is no need therefore to take a judgment on that, and you can judge the application on its own merits, which as I say are adequate in accordance with your conditions and lead to a recommendation to grant plan permission for a series of conditions which do include cycle store in this case, and the necessary legal obligation as laid out within the SMAT.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for the update. Gerald.
Happy to move the officer recommendation.
Linda, thank you. Any other views before we go to a vote? Those in favour of the proposal? Against? Abstentions?
Planning permission's granted.
Thank you, Juliet. And finally, Grosvenor Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, drawing your attention to the SMAT. This is a 6 to 7 bed HMO change. The percentage mix is currently around a quarter, 23.2% in this area. You've got quite a few flats that make up that area. You can see there, some of which actually do have some HMO occupancy. It's a slightly different form of property than we often see HMOs in, so a bigger property which does enable some pretty reasonably sized rooms, a couple of them over 10 square metres, as well as a 34 square metre communal living space. It's a change of use of that ground floor room previously marked up as utility, which is achieving the 7-bed occupancy sought here, in line with previous advice, but on the individual merits of this application, it's not considered to require plan permission as it's not a material change of use. An unconditional plan permission is therefore recommended.
Thank you. Thank you, Maisie.
So this application for a change of use from a Class C4 house in multiple occupation to 7-person house in multiple occupation. The property provides 7 bedrooms ranging from 8.17 square metres to 11.98 square metres. These all exceed the 6.5 square metre requirement. When bedrooms are under 10, the space standards dictate a required communal area of 34 square metres. This property also meets that requirement. 4 of the 7 bedrooms also benefit from an ensuite shower room, which again is above requirement. The application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan, and also complies with the Houses in Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you all to fully support this recommendation. To refuse such a fully compliant application will only result in increased workload, time and cost for all those involved in subsequently taking this to appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your deputations today. Councillor Van Jackson.
Can I ask, Ian, on page 85, there is a plan of what the different rooms are. It looks as if the downstairs loo, which is part of the kitchen, has no door. Is this intentional?
No, there is a door. It opens, it opens from the hanging down on the plan, opening to the internal wall. You can.
Oh yes, no, but it hits the loo, so it can't close.
So that's a wash basin.
Oh, it hits the wash basin, so it can't close.
Upon there, clearly they will need to manage that matter. The wash basin could either be it's a CAD drawing. It's a standard cut and drop image. A thinner wash basin could, I'm sure, be installed to manage that issue.
Okay.
I would say that this site is licensed and is occupied as a 7-bed HMO and has been since the 21st of October 22.
And can I ask, the 3 bedrooms on the first floor share a shower room on the first floor, but have to go down to the ground floor to use the loo. Is that okay in terms of standards?
That shower room on the first floor is adequate size to include a toilet. I can't tell you whether there's one in there. There may well be an image of a toilet underneath the printed word shower room.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Do we believe this requires planning permission?
Can I propose that it does require planning permission, that the proposal is considered to be development requiring planning permission due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste amenity impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent SPA?
With the normal advice regarding the unreasonableness of member behaviour.
Okay, I'll second. Any other views? Okay. Unless there's anything else, shall we move the recommendation, the motions on the table? Those in favour? Those against? And abstentions?
The committee have determined that planning permission is required, so you need to go on and consider.
Councillor Bannon Jackson.
I propose that planning permission is granted with the usual conditions about start date, wastewater, Solent SBA, drawings, SIL and section 106. Unless, have I missed anything out, Ian?
No, that's everything. SIL isn't applicable. Yes.
Okay. Well, we could ask them for it anyway.
Okay, have a proposer. Anybody want to second? Councillor Mason. Unless there's anything else, those in favour of the motion on the table? And against? And abstentions? Thank you.
Before we do, can I just ask one question, Chair? I'm very conscious that we've had no Labour councillors here for the whole of this meeting. Did you receive any apologies from them for not coming, or any of the substitutes being notified to come in their stead? Because we're meant to do this on a cross-party basis, but it's quite difficult when no Labour councillors turn up.
I've received no apologies, and Democratic Services haven't either.
Okay.
Can I just add planning permission was granted there?
Okay, sorry. Yes. Thank you, Judith.
Thank
Last thanks from me. Thanks to officers for your support during this municipal year. We don't always make things easy, so thank you. I shall close the meeting at 12:48.